The surgical lights blinded me as I lay strapped to the cold metal table. My wrists were bound, my chest rising in panicked gasps. A masked surgeon leaned over, syringe in hand, while my daughter-in-law whispered fiercely from behind the glass, "Do it now. She won't resist." My blood ran cold as I caught sight of a briefcase being passed to a man in a black coat cash for my body. The monitor beside me beeped wildly, each sound hammering my terror. Was this really my fate? To be cut open and sold like spare parts? And who else was profiting from my suffering? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying AMEN below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I still remember the cold sting of that winter morning in Pittsburgh. The sky was gray, heavy with snow, the kind of sky that pressed down on your chest and made you feel smaller than you already were. I stood in my narrow kitchen, holding a chipped mug of coffee between my rough hands, and I told myself this was just another day. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Nothing had been ordinary in my life for months. Not since my oldest boy, Dan, had started to fade before my eyes. Dan used to be strong, the kind of man who could fix a broken engine with nothing but a wrench and a steady hand. He worked long hours at the garage, always coming home with grease on his shirt and that same grin he had since he was a boy. But then he started coming home tired, too tired. His skin grew pale, his eyes sunk into dark hollows, and then came the worst of it, blood in his urine. When he told me, my knees almost gave out. I wanted to believe it was just the stress of work, but in my heart, I knew it was something darker. The doctors said his kidneys were failing. They said time was short. And almost immediately, my daughter-in-law Olivia stepped forward with her honey-sweet voice and her hard eyes. "Mom," she said, though she never called me that before, "you're the only match. You have to do it. Dan's life depends on you." She said it so firmly, like it wasn't a request but a command. And somehow, everyone around me echoed her words. The doctors, her friends, even Dan, my poor boy, sitting weak in his hospital bed, whispered, "Mom, I know you'll save me." I told myself it was my duty. That's what a mother does, isn't it? She sacrifices. I had spent my life waking up before dawn, selling vegetables at the market, sewing clothes late into the night, all so my boys could have a chance. Why would this be any different? And yet, there was a heaviness in my chest that no prayer could lift. Something about Olivia's sharp glances, about the way she whispered on the phone late at night, about the unlabeled pill bottles I once glimpsed in her purse. It all gnawed at me like rats in the walls. Still, I signed the consent form. My hand shook so much that the pen left scratches across the page, but I signed it. I told myself I was ready. But that night, when I sat alone at my kitchen table, the house silent except for the squeak of Edward's wheelchair in the other room, I couldn't quiet my thoughts. Edward, my husband, had been half paralyzed for years, hardly able to speak, but I felt his eyes on me, heavy with questions he couldn't ask. I wanted to tell him everything, to ask him if I was doing the right thing, but I kept silent. Some burdens, I thought, were mine alone to carry. It was Caleb who first cracked the wall of silence. My grandson, just 9 years old, with his wide eyes and restless little hands. He came over after school, mud still on his sneakers, and sat in the living room pushing his toy truck back and forth across the rug. Then he looked up at me with a seriousness far too old for his years. "Grandma," he said softly, "what if Dad is sick because somebody's making him sick?" My heart froze. I laughed it off, ruffled his hair, told him not to worry. But the seed was planted, and it rooted deep inside me. Later, Sam, my younger boy, came by to fix the light in the kitchen. He's a quiet man, steady, with the same strong hands his father once had. As he screwed in the new bulb, he leaned close and whispered, "Mom, something's not right with Olivia. I've seen her hide medicine bottles, ones with no labels, and I don't think the doctors gave them to Dan." His words hit me like a hammer. I dropped the dish I was washing, water splashing down my front, but I couldn't say a word. I just stared at him, my throat tight, my mind racing. I wanted to believe Olivia was what she pretended to be, a devoted wife caring for my son. But the pieces didn't fit. Her late-night phone calls, her cold, calculating stares, the way she hovered over Dan's food and drink like a guard. And now Caleb's questions, Sam's suspicions, it all twisted together into a knot I couldn't untangle. Still, when Olivia showed up at my door the next morning, crisp papers in her hand and that commanding voice, I found myself nodding. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll do it." My heart was pounding, but I couldn't refuse. That evening, after the house was quiet, Caleb slipped into the kitchen with something hidden in his small backpack. He set it on the table and unzipped it slowly, as if he were afraid of what he was about to reveal. Out came an old phone. The screen cracked. "Grandma," he whispered, "I found this. It's Mom's." He tapped the screen, and a recording played. Olivia's voice filled the room, low and cold. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." I dropped the phone. My hands trembled so badly I thought I'd never stop shaking. Caleb's eyes were wide, glistening with tears, but he held his chin high. "I thought you should know," he said. "My sweet, brave boy." In that moment, the last thread of doubt inside me snapped. Something terrible was happening, and I was caught in the middle of it. But what could I do? I was just an old woman, a mother, a grandmother. The surgery was scheduled, the papers were signed. My son's life hung in the balance. And yet, deep inside, I knew. If I went through with this, I might not be saving Dan at all. I might be walking straight into Olivia's trap. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog where every sound was muffled and every step uncertain. I went about my chores the same as always, sweeping the porch, cooking Edward's simple meals, folding laundry that never seemed to end, but my mind was somewhere else. That recording on Caleb's little phone kept echoing in my ears. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." Those words weren't meant for a mother's heart. They were cold, clinical, as if my life and Dan's suffering were nothing more than pieces of a puzzle Olivia was arranging. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, but the evidence was stacking too high to ignore. Caleb's innocent eyes, Sam's sharp suspicions, even the way Olivia carried herself, all of it pressed down on me. One evening, Sam came by again. He leaned against the doorframe, grease still on his shirt from a long day fixing pipes. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. "Mom," he said, "I followed Olivia today. She didn't go to the pharmacy like she told Dan. She drove to a parking garage downtown. I stayed far back, but I saw her meet a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark jacket, cap pulled low. He handed her an envelope, and she gave him a cooler. A cooler, Mom, like the kind you'd use to carry medicine or—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Or organs." My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the counter just to stay upright. "Sam," I whispered, "are you sure?" He nodded, his face pale. "I took pictures. They're blurry, but you can see it's her. I'm telling you, something's wrong here. Olivia's not saving Dan, she's destroying him." I sank into a chair, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to storm into Olivia's house and demand the truth, but fear locked me in place. What if Sam was wrong? What if all this suspicion was just making things worse for Dan? Yet, deep inside, I knew my son wasn't simply unlucky. His sickness had a cause, and Olivia was at the center of it. The next Sunday, I went to church. Street Josephs had been part of my life since I was a girl. The wooden pews, the stained glass windows catching the morning light, the scent of wax and incense, it all wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I stayed after Mass, waiting until most people had left. Then I went to find Father Brennan. He was in his small office, a pot of tea steaming on the desk. His hair had turned silver, but his eyes were still kind, steady. "Father," I began, my voice shaking, "I don't know if I can do what they're asking of me. My son needs me, but my heart tells me something is terribly wrong." He poured me a cup of tea, slid it across the desk, and leaned back in his chair. "Maggie," he said gently, "a mother's love is powerful, but so is her wisdom. Sacrifice has meaning only when it's given freely, without deceit. If you suspect harm, you must look deeper. Truth and faith go hand in hand." I clutched the warm cup, but it did nothing to thaw the cold in my bones. "But what if it's too late?" I whispered. "Then," he said, his eyes meeting mine, "you must have the courage to face whatever comes. Silence in the face of evil is no virtue." His words pierced me, left me both comforted and unsettled. I left the church with the snow crunching under my boots, the world feeling heavier than ever. That night, Caleb came over again. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, his small backpack slung over his shoulders. "Grandma," he said, "I found more." He pulled out the cracked phone, tapped on the screen, and a video played. My breath caught. It was Olivia, standing in a dimly lit parking garage, talking to that same man in the dark jacket. Beside her was another woman in scrubs, Linda, one of the nurses I'd seen at the hospital. The sound was grainy, but I could hear Olivia's voice clear as day. "This transplant will secure our reputation. Once it's done, we can expand. The clients are waiting." My hands shook so violently that I almost dropped the phone. "Caleb," I whispered, "how did you get this?" He looked at the floor. "It was on Mom's phone. She doesn't know I copied it." I was scared. "But I thought you needed to see it." His small voice cracked, and I realized just how heavy a burden my grandson had been carrying. I pulled him close, my heart breaking. "You're so brave, Caleb. But this is dangerous." He nodded, his little chin pressing into my shoulder. "I just don't want you to get hurt." Later that evening, Sam returned with more news. He had shown the pictures he took to an old friend, Detective Karen Lopez, retired now but still sharp. She agreed the images looked suspicious and said she'd quietly make a few calls. "She thinks Olivia's connected to something bigger," Sam said grimly. "Maybe a whole network. And Mom, if that's true, you're not just in danger, you're the key piece they need." I pressed a trembling hand to my chest. "The key piece?" He nodded. Your kidney. If you go through with this, it won't just be about saving Dan. It'll be about proving their method works. They'll use your sacrifice as evidence to sell more organs, to lure in more clients. That's why Olivia is so desperate. The room spun. I sat down hard, the old chair creaking under me. My heart ached with fear and fury. My own daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my family, was using my boy's life, my life, as currency. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking endlessly on the wall, Edward silent in his chair beside me. I thought of the will I had written, tucked away in a drawer. I thought of Dan's weak smile, of Caleb's trembling hands, of Sam's determined face. My family was tearing apart before my eyes, and I felt powerless to stop it. But then, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was Father Brennan's words. Maybe it was Caleb's courage. Maybe it was Sam's quiet rage. I realized that being a mother wasn't just about sacrifice, it was about protecting, about standing guard against harm, even when that harm came from inside the family. The day of the surgery loomed closer. Olivia's visits grew more insistent. She would stride into my house without knocking, papers in hand, her voice sharp as glass. "Time is running out, Maggie," she'd say. "Dan's getting weaker every day. If you love him, you'll stop hesitating." I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Each word she spoke only tightened the knot of dread in my chest. 2 nights before the scheduled surgery, Sam came to me with Emily Chen, a young reporter he had contacted through Detective Lopez. Emily had a file of documents she laid out on my table. Shipping records, offshore accounts, receipts for medical supplies that didn't add up. "Olivia Carter," Emily said firmly, "is tied to Victor Hale, a known broker in illegal organ trade. This isn't just about your family, it's international." End. I covered my mouth, a sob escaping. It was worse than I imagined. "Maggie," Emily said gently, "we can take this to the police, but we need more. Concrete proof, right at the hospital." I thought of Caleb's video, of Sam's photos, of the recording on that cracked phone. We had proof, but would it be enough? Would the doctors, the police, even believe us in time? The morning of the surgery, the world outside was blanketed in snow. The ambulance came for me before dawn. I clutched a small bag with a change of clothes and an old handkerchief I'd kept since my wedding day. Olivia rode beside me, her face calm, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. "Don't worry, she said smoothly. After this, everything will be fine. Her words made me shiver. At the hospital, I was wheeled through bright, sterile corridors. The lights above blurred as I passed, one after another, like a countdown. Doctor, Morgan met me at the prep room, his expression professional but kind. Mrs. Harris, we're ready when you are. Just relax. Relax. As if such a thing were possible. Through the glass, I saw Olivia speaking to Linda Brooks and a man I recognized from Sam's photo, Victor Hale. My heart pounded. It was all coming to a head, right here, right now. And just as the nurse reached for the syringe of anesthesia, the doors banged open. Snow boots squeaked on the floor, and a small, breathless voice cried out, "Grandma, stop. You can't do it. I have to tell them why Dad really needs your kidney." It was Caleb, his cheeks red from the cold, his little fists clutching that cracked phone like a weapon of truth. The room froze. My heart nearly stopped. And I knew the storm was about to break. The moment Caleb's voice rang out, the entire operating room froze. The beep of the heart monitor seemed to echo louder, like a hammer striking against the silence. Nurses exchanged bewildered glances, and Dr. Morgan, who had been readying the anesthesia, lifted his hand sharply. "Stop everything," he commanded. His voice was firm, the kind of voice that could cut through chaos. I tried to sit up, but the straps held me down. My chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. Caleb's face swam into view, flushed, frightened, but burning with a determination far beyond his 9 years. His little hands clutched the cracked phone like it was a lifeline. "Grandma," he said again, his voice trembling but clear. "I have to show them. I have to tell the truth." Through the glass pane of the observation window, Olivia slammed her hand against the door. "Get him out of there!" she shrieked, her voice shrill, nearly hysterical. "He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a child." But the panic in her eyes betrayed her. It wasn't the fear of a mother watching her son misbehave, it was the fear of exposure. Dr. Morgan turned toward Caleb. "What do you have to say, son?" His tone softened just a fraction, but the weight of authority still carried. Caleb swallowed hard. His tiny fingers shook as he tapped on the phone screen. "I found this. On my mom's old phone." His voice cracked, but he steadied himself. "She and her friends, they don't want to save my dad. They're making him sick." He held the phone high, and the recording began to play. Olivia's voice filled the sterile room, cold and calculating. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse. This case will secure everything we need." The words sliced through me like a blade. Tears welled in my eyes, not from weakness, but from the sheer confirmation of every fear I had tried to bury. Gasps rippled among the staff. One of the younger nurses covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Dr. Morgan's expression hardened. He motioned for the nurse holding the syringe to step back. Olivia pounded harder on the glass. "It's fake!" she screamed. "It's all fake! He doesn't understand what he's hearing!" But Caleb wasn't done. His little hands fumbled again with the phone, and then a shaky video began to play. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Olivia, standing in that dim garage, speaking with Victor Hale. Beside her stood Linda Brooks in her scrubs, glancing around nervously. Olivia's voice carried again. "Once the transplant is complete, we'll have the perfect record to show. The clients overseas are waiting. This is worth more than you can imagine." My blood turned to ice. Every suspicion, every uneasy night, every whispered doubt, it was all true. My daughter-in-law, the woman who was supposed to love my son, had poisoned him and planned to use my sacrifice as her stepping stone into darkness. Dr. Morgan's face went pale. He turned sharply to his staff. "Shut this down. Now. This is no longer a surgery, it's a potential crime scene." 2 nurses immediately began disconnecting machines, while another hurried toward the phone on the wall to contact hospital security. On the other side of the glass, Olivia's face twisted, her mask of calm shattered. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound. "Don't listen to him. He's a child. He's been manipulated." The door burst open then, and Sam stormed in, his face red, his shirt still stained from work. His eyes blazed with fury. "Enough," he roared. "Don't you see? She's been poisoning Dan? She's behind all of this. He shoved past a nurse and rushed to Caleb, pulling the boy close, shielding him with his broad frame. Then he turned, his gaze locking on Olivia through the glass. "What did you do to my brother, Olivia? What have you been feeding him?" Olivia's face contorted with rage. She banged again on the glass, her fists leaving smudges. "Lies," she spat. "You think you can accuse me without proof? You'll regret this." But the proof was already playing out in the room. Caleb's recording, the video, Sam's photos now displayed on Dr. Morgan's tablet as he pulled them up, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Just then, a weak, trembling voice drifted in from the preparation room next door. "What's happening?" It was Dan. He was trying to sit up, his thin arms trembling as the IV line swayed. His face was pale, his eyes clouded with confusion. "Dan, don't move," Dr. Morgan said, stepping quickly to the doorway. But Dan's gaze darted toward Olivia. "Olivia," he whispered hoarsely, "tell me. It isn't true. Tell me you didn't." His words broke off in a cough. Olivia's mask slipped completely. Her eyes darted wildly, and she shouted, "Everything I did was for us, for you. You wouldn't understand." The room erupted. Security guards rushed in, their heavy boots clattering against the tile. They moved straight to Olivia, who fought like a cornered animal, scratching, screaming, trying to break free. "No, you don't understand. I was building a future. This is bigger than you all." "Hand over." Linda Brooks, pale as a sheet, tried to slip out the side door, but Sam caught sight of her. "Don't let her leave," he bellowed. One of the guards intercepted her, and within moments both women were restrained. Victor Hale was next. He had been lurking in the hallway, but when he saw Olivia fall, he tried to turn and flee. 2 more guards blocked his path. He struggled, cursed, but they dragged him back in, his cap falling off to reveal his grim face. I lay on the table, trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks. Relief and grief crashed together inside me, so overwhelming I thought my heart might give out. I turned my head toward Caleb, my brave little grandson, still clinging to Sam's leg. His eyes were wet, but he stood tall, his tiny frame rigid with determination. "You saved me," I whispered hoarsely. "You saved us all." Dr. Morgan approached, his expression softer now, though his voice was still grave. "Mrs. Harris, you've been through an ordeal no one should endure. We'll cancel the surgery immediately. Your son will receive alternative treatment dialysis and approved medication, and the authorities will handle the rest." I nodded weakly, my body too drained to respond fully. But inside, a storm was settling. For the first time in months, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. As Olivia, Linda, and Victor were led away in handcuffs, their shouts echoing down the hallway, I closed my eyes. Not to shut out the world, but to offer a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for Caleb's courage, for Sam's determination, for the truth finally ripping through the lies. But the battle wasn't over yet. Dan was still sick, still fragile, and the scars Olivia had left on our family would not heal easily. When I opened my eyes again, Caleb was at my side, his small hand gripping mine. "It's okay now, Grandma," he whispered. "You don't have to do it. You don't have to give them anything." And I squeezed his hand with what little strength I had. "You're right, my boy," I said softly. "But I will give you this. I'll give you the truth, so you'll never forget how important it is to stand up when everything seems lost." And with that, I knew. The darkest moment had passed, but the long journey ahead was only beginning. The chaos of that day still rings in my ears, even now. The shouting, the clatter of instruments, the heavy boots of security guards as they dragged Olivia, Linda, and Victor away, it all felt like a storm tearing through my world. And then, just as suddenly, there was silence. Not peace, not yet, but a silence so sharp it felt almost sacred. I lay on the operating table, tears slipping down my temples, staring up at the blinding white light above me. For a moment, I didn't know if I was alive or dreaming. My chest rose and fell, shallow and uneven, and the only thing that grounded me was the small, warm hand of my grandson gripping mine, Caleb, my little warrior. Dr. Morgan leaned over, his face lined with exhaustion but steady. "Mrs. Harris," he said gently, "You're safe now. The surgery is canceled. We'll focus on stabilizing Dan and moving him to a proper treatment plan. You don't have to go through this ordeal any longer." Safe. The word echoed in my head, unfamiliar, fragile. Could I really call myself safe when my son lay weak in the next room, betrayed by the very woman he trusted most? They wheeled me into a recovery room, even though no surgery had taken place. The nurses fussed over me, checking my vitals, adjusting my blankets. I let them, though my mind was miles away. Through the open door, I could hear Murmur's staff whispering about the scandal, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of Olivia's plan. Some voices carried disbelief, others outrage. I closed my eyes. Gossip would spread like wildfire now, but I didn't care. The truth was finally out. Not long after, Sam came in, carrying Caleb on his hip. Sam's face was drawn, his jaw set hard, but his eyes softened when they met mine. He placed Caleb gently on the chair beside me, then sat at the edge of my bed. "Mom," he said quietly, "it's over. They've taken Olivia and her people into custody. The police are already talking to Dr. Morgan. Detective Lopez is on her way here too. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." I reached for his hand, rough and stained from years of hard work. "Sam," I whispered, my voice breaking, "if it hadn't been for you and Caleb, I would have gone through with it. I would have signed my life away, and Olivia would have won." Sam shook his head firmly. "No, Mom, you've carried enough. It's time for us to protect you now." His grip tightened, a silent promise. Caleb leaned close, his little face solemn. "Grandma, I didn't mean to scare you. I couldn't let them hurt you. Or Dad." I pulled him into my arms, kissing his hair. Holding him so tightly, he squeaked. "You saved me, Caleb. Don't you ever think otherwise. You were braver than all of us." The boy smiled faintly, though his eyes still shimmered with worry. He was too young to carry such a burden, and I prayed that somehow, in time, the innocence would return to his eyes. Later, they allowed me to visit Dan. My legs trembled as Sam guided me into his room. The sight of him nearly undid me. He lay pale against the hospital bed, tubes in his arms, his breath shallow but steady. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "is it true, everything they said about Olivia?" The words caught in my throat. How could I tell him the truth without crushing what little strength he had left? But lies had no place anymore. So I sat beside him, took his cold hand in mine, and nodded. "Yes, Dan," I said softly. "It's true. She hurt you. She made you sick. And she tried to use me too." My voice broke. "I'm so sorry." He turned his face away, tears streaking down his cheeks. "I thought she loved me," he whispered. "All this time, I thought she was taking care of me." I stroked his hair like I had when he was a little boy with scraped knees. "You couldn't have known, son. She fooled us all. What matters now is that you're still here. We'll get through this together." Dan closed his eyes, silent, his shoulders shaking. It was grief, betrayal, and exhaustion all tangled into one. I wanted to take his pain into myself, to carry it so he wouldn't have to, but I knew some wounds had to be faced alone. That night, I sat by his bedside, refusing to leave. Sam brought me a blanket and a thermos of tea, but I barely touched it. Edward, still at home, was in the care of a neighbor, but my heart couldn't stretch beyond the walls of that hospital room. All I could do was sit, pray, and hold Dan's hand as the machines beeped steadily in the background. Around midnight, Emily Chen appeared in the doorway, a notebook in hand, her young face shadowed with determination. "Mrs. Harris," she said softly, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought you'd want to know the police confirmed Olivia's network was bigger than we imagined. They were trafficking organs overseas, using falsified patient records. Your case might be the breakthrough they needed." Her words chilled me. Bigger than we imagined. How many other mothers, how many other sons, had suffered because of people like Olivia? I looked down at Dan, his chest rising and falling with fragile breaths, and I felt both sorrow and fury. "Tell them," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "Tell the world what they did. People need to know." Emily nodded, scribbling in her notebook. "I promise, I'll make sure your family's story isn't buried." The following morning, Father Brennan came to see me. He sat quietly, his presence calm and grounding. He didn't offer platitudes or hollow comfort. Instead, he simply said, "The truth has a way of burning everything it touches, Maggie. But from the ashes, something new can rise. Hold fast." I nodded, tears slipping down my face. His words reminded me that though Olivia's betrayal had shattered us, it hadn't destroyed us. We were still standing. In the days that followed, the hospital became a whirlwind of investigators, reporters, and whispered conversations. Olivia's face was plastered on every news screen, no longer the smiling wife, but the exposed criminal. Linda Brooks and Victor Hale were named as co-conspirators, and slowly, the pieces of the puzzle came together. The shady phone calls, the unexplained pills, the late-night meetings, they had all been part of a carefully woven net. But nets can break. And ours had, because of a little boy who refused to stay silent. One evening, as snow fell softly against the hospital window, Sam sat beside me. His arm rested protectively across the back of my chair. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I know this has been the hardest thing you've ever faced, but we're going to rebuild. Dan will get better, and we'll make sure Caleb never forgets what it means to stand up for what's right." I leaned against him, exhausted but grateful. "You're a good son, Sam. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled faintly. "You'll never have to find out." And for the first time in months, I felt a fragile flicker of peace. Not the peace of everything being right again, but the peace of knowing we had faced the darkness head-on and survived. Yet I also knew the road ahead was long. Dan's recovery would be slow, and the scars Olivia left on our family would linger. But we would walk that road together, step by step, no longer in silence. Because the truth, once spoken, cannot be buried again. I thought the worst was over, once Olivia and her accomplices were led away in handcuffs. I thought that after the storm came calm, that I could finally breathe again. But life doesn't work that way. The truth doesn't just set you free, it leaves scars, and those scars have to be carried every single day. Dan was alive, yes, but he was far from well. His kidneys were too damaged from the poisons Olivia had been slipping into his system, and though the doctors assured me dialysis would keep him stable, the sight of my strong, cheerful son hooked up to machines cut me to pieces. His laugh was gone, his eyes hollow. He would smile weakly when Caleb visited, but behind that smile I saw a man broken, not just by sickness, but by betrayal. Caleb, my sweet boy, carried his own wounds. For days after the operating room, he would cling to me whenever he came to the hospital. At night, he would wake from nightmares, screaming that his mom was coming to take me away. Sam told me he often found Caleb hiding in closets, clutching that old cracked phone like it was a shield. He was 9 years old, but he had seen more evil than most grown men. Sam tried to be the pillar for all of us. He would fix leaky pipes at home in the morning, rush to the hospital in the afternoon, and spend his evenings making sure Edward was fed and cared for. He never complained, but I saw the exhaustion etched on his face, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. I wanted to ease his burden, to remind him he was still young, that he deserved more than this endless cycle of responsibility. But every time I opened my mouth, he would just shake his head and say, "Don't worry about me, Mom. I'll carry it." And then there was me. I tried to be strong, but I was haunted by the question that wouldn't leave me alone. How had I let it go so far? How had I let Olivia slip into our lives, smiling sweetly while planting poison into my son's veins? I had welcomed her, praised her, even defended her when Sam voiced suspicions. I had doubted my own instincts, silenced the warnings in my heart, all because I didn't want to see the truth. The guilt was heavy. Some nights I would sit at the kitchen table, Edward silent in his wheelchair beside me, and cry until my body shook. I told him everything, even though he couldn't answer. I told him about Olivia's words, about Caleb's bravery, about how close I came to giving away my life. Sometimes I thought I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. Whether he fully understood or not, I'll never know. But talking to him helped me carry the weight, if only a little. News of Olivia's arrest spread quickly. Reporters crowded outside the hospital, and soon our family's name was in every paper and on every television screen in Pittsburgh. "Organ trafficking ring exposed," the headlines read. Some painted us as victims, others as heroes, but all of it felt unreal. Strangers sent letters of sympathy, church members offered casseroles and prayers, and still I felt hollow. The whole world seemed to know our story, but only we knew the true cost. One evening, Emily Chen came back with more updates. She sat at my kitchen table, her notebook open, her eyes serious. "Mrs. Harris," she said, "the investigation has uncovered at least 4 other families who were targeted. People whose loved ones were mysteriously sick, pressured into surgeries, manipulated by the same network. Your case gave them the courage to speak up." My hands trembled around the cup of tea I held. 4 other families. That meant 4 other mothers. 4 other sons or daughters who had walked the same path of fear and confusion. "Dear Lord," I whispered, "how deep does this go?" Emily's expression softened. "Deeper than any of us realized. But your grandson's bravery and your survival may have stopped it from spreading further. That's something to hold on to." I nodded, though my heart ached. Yes, it was something, but it was small comfort when I looked at Dan's frail body in that hospital bed. A week after Olivia's arrest, they allowed Dan to come home for the first time, though only under strict conditions. A dialysis machine was set up in the living room, its tubes and wires like a constant reminder of what he'd endured. Caleb hovered near his father, afraid to leave his side, as if he thought Olivia might reappear at any moment. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield, quiet but scarred. I cooked the same meals, swept the same floors, but everything was different. Even Edward, silent as always, seemed heavier in his chair, weighed down by the tension that clung to our walls. One night, after Caleb had gone to bed and Sam had stepped outside for air, Dan spoke. His voice was weak, but steady. "Mom," he said, staring at the ceiling, "I need to ask you something." I sat in the chair beside him, my knitting idle in my lap. "What is it, son?" He turned his head, his eyes dark with pain. "How do I live with this? Knowing the woman I loved, the mother of my child, was the one who tried to kill me. How do I look at Caleb and explain that his mom isn't coming back?" My heart cracked. I reached for his hand, squeezed it tightly. "Dan," I whispered, "you live one day at a time. You hold on to the people who are still here, who love you. You hold on to Caleb, to Sam, to me. You let us be your strength until you find your own again." Tears slid down his cheeks. "I feel like such a fool. I didn't protect him. I didn't protect you." I stroked his hair gently. "You trusted someone you loved. That isn't foolish, it's human. The fault isn't yours, Dan. The blame belongs to Olivia, and she'll face justice for it." He nodded weakly, though the pain in his eyes didn't ease. I knew this was only the beginning of his healing, that betrayal leaves wounds deeper than any scalpel can cut. Meanwhile, Sam grew restless. He spent more time at the police station, speaking with Detective Lopez, asking about court dates and evidence. I worried about him. His anger simmered just beneath the surface, and though it was aimed at Olivia and her partners, I feared it would eat away at him too. "Sam," I said one evening as he fixed a broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet, "you need to rest. You can't carry all of this alone." He set down the screwdriver, his eyes blazing. "Rest? Mom, they almost killed you. They nearly destroyed Dan. And for what? Money. Power. I can't just sit back and wait. I need to make sure they never hurt anyone again." I reached out, touched his arm. "I know, but don't lose yourself in the fight. We need you here too." He sighed, the fire dimming slightly. "I'll try. For you." The trial loomed on the horizon. Olivia, Linda, and Victor would face charges of attempted murder, fraud, and illegal trafficking. The thought of sitting in that courtroom, of looking Olivia in the eyes again, filled me with dread. But I knew I had to. Not just for Dan, not just for Caleb, but for every family that had been deceived. And so we waited, living each day in the shadow of what had been revealed, clinging to one another, trying to stitch together the torn fabric of our lives. The weeks before the trial felt like waiting for a storm you know will come but cannot outrun. Each sunrise brought us closer to the day when I would have to sit in a courtroom, face Olivia across the aisle, and speak the truth aloud for the world to hear. Dan grew stronger physically, though his recovery was slow. The dialysis machine hummed, like a constant reminder of what had been done to him. He hated it, but he endured it, clinging to the hope that his body would stabilize. Some days he would sit quietly, staring out the window at the snow-covered street, lost in thought. Other days, he would take Caleb's hand and whisper, "I'll never let anyone hurt you again." His words broke me because I knew he still carried the weight of guilt, even though none of this was his fault. Caleb was quieter now, too. The boy who once filled rooms with chatter and silly questions seemed older, burdened beyond his years. He stayed close to me, often climbing onto my lap in the evenings, as if to reassure himself that I was still there. Sometimes he would ask softly, "Grandma, will Mommy be in jail forever?" My heart ached each time, but I never lied. "I don't know, sweetheart," I would answer, stroking his hair. "But she has to answer for what she did." He would nod solemnly, too young to understand justice, but old enough to sense its weight. Sam grew restless as the trial approached. He met often with Detective Lopez, going over evidence, reviewing witness lists, making sure nothing would slip through the cracks. His anger had cooled into determination, but I could still see it flicker when Olivia's name was mentioned. One evening, as he repaired a leaky faucet, he muttered, "I swear, Mom, if the jury doesn't see through her lies, I'll lose my mind." I touched his arm gently. "The truth has already begun its work, Sam. You don't need to fight every battle. Some are meant for the courts, not for us." He sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "Maybe, but I just can't stand the thought of her walking free." Neither could I. When the subpoena arrived, my hands trembled as I opened the envelope, my name in black ink, commanding me to testify. It was expected, of course, but seeing it on paper made it real. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. I had faced Olivia's deception in private. Now I would have to expose her in public. The morning of the preliminary hearing, the courthouse loomed gray against the winter sky. I walked up the stone steps with Sam on one side and Caleb clutching my other hand. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but their voices blurred into meaningless noise. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and cold marble, heavy with formality. When they brought Olivia in, my breath caught. She was thinner, her hair pulled back tightly, her wrists bound by cuffs. But her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, still carried defiance. She scanned the room, and when her gaze landed on me, a flicker of something passed across her face. Not remorse. Never that. It was contempt, as if she still believed I had betrayed her, not the other way around. I gripped Caleb's hand tighter. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, presenting evidence of the illegal medications, the recordings Caleb had uncovered, the photographs Sam had taken. Piece by piece, the puzzle was reconstructed in front of the court. Olivia sat still, her lips pressed tight, while her lawyer objected, argued, tried to twist the facts. But the truth stood firm. When it was my turn to testify, my knees wobbled. I walked slowly to the witness stand, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and then sat, my fingers clutching the wooden rail. The prosecutor asked gentle questions at first. My name, my age, my relationship to Dan. Then came the harder ones. When did I suspect something was wrong? What had I seen Olivia do? How did I discover the pills, the recordings, the whispered conversations at night? I answered each question, my voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. At times, my throat tightened with tears, but I forced myself to continue. Every word felt like pulling thorns from my chest, but I knew it had to be done. Finally, the prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Harris, why did you agree to donate your kidney, even when you had doubts?" I swallowed hard. My eyes flicked toward Caleb, sitting with Sam in the front row, his little hands folded in his lap. Then I looked back at the jury. "Because I'm a mother," I said, my voice breaking. "Because when your child is suffering, you'd do anything to ease their pain, even if it means sacrificing yourself. That's what Olivia counted on. She knew I wouldn't refuse. But love should never be used as a weapon. She betrayed my son's trust. She betrayed this family, and I cannot forgive her for that." The room was silent. For a moment, I thought my heart might burst from the weight of it all. Olivia's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest that I misunderstood, that Caleb had misinterpreted conversations, that grief clouded my judgment. But each time, I held firm. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know what nearly happened to me. And, by the time I stepped down from the stand, my legs were trembling, but my spirit felt lighter. I had spoken the truth. Whatever came next, I had done my part. As we left the courthouse, Caleb slipped his hand into mine. "You were so brave, Grandma," he whispered. I bent down, kissed his forehead, and said, "No, my boy. You were the brave one first. I just followed your lead." End. The trial began in earnest on a gray Monday morning, the kind of day when the clouds seemed to press low over Pittsburgh, heavy with the weight of secrets waiting to be revealed. I walked into the courthouse with Sam at my side, Caleb holding my hand tightly, and Dan frail but determined, supported by a nurse. It was the first time he had left the house since his release from the hospital, and though his steps were slow, his eyes burned with the need for justice. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches in the back, their pens scratching furiously, cameras poised for every flicker of drama. Neighbors, strangers, even parish members from St. Joseph's had come to witness. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had worn a mask of kindness while weaving a web of deceit. Olivia sat at the defense table, her hair sleek, her expression carefully composed. She wore a navy suit, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the barest trace. She looked every inch the wronged wife, the misunderstood caregiver, but her eyes betrayed her, sharp, cold, darting like a cornered animal searching for escape. The prosecutor began with a clear, steady voice, laying out the case. Olivia Carter, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and participation in an international trafficking ring. Her accomplices, Linda Brooks and Victor Hale, had already agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimonies would be heard in the coming days. The first witnesses were doctors, pharmacists, and investigators. They spoke of falsified prescriptions, altered medical records, and hidden bank accounts. Charts and photographs were displayed on a large screen. Each slide another nail in the coffin of Olivia's carefully constructed life. But Olivia's lawyer fought back fiercely. He painted her as a devoted wife who had been misled by others, claiming she had no knowledge of what the medications truly were. She only followed medical advice, he argued. She did what any loving spouse would do, fight to save her husband. I watched from the front row, my hands clenched in my lap. The gall of it made my stomach churn. To twist love into a shield for cruelty, it was the same tactic she had used on me. Then came the testimony of Linda Brooks. She looked worn, defeated, her hands trembling as she took the stand. "I met Olivia through the hospital," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She told me there was a way to make extra money. She said Dan's case would be perfect because his mother was a match. All I had to do was provide access to certain files, slip in the medications she gave me, and look the other way." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Olivia's mask cracked for the first time. She leaned toward her lawyer, hissing furiously, shaking her head, but Linda pressed on. I knew it was wrong, but she made it sound like science, like progress. I thought no one would get hurt. I was wrong. When Victor Hale took the stand, the atmosphere grew darker still. He spoke without shame, his deep voice steady, almost boastful. "There's a market for everything," he said coldly. Olivia wanted in. She offered me her husband's case, told me his mother was desperate, willing to do anything. She said once the transplant was complete, we'd have the perfect data set to prove our methods. Clients overseas would pay a fortune. Dan stiffened beside me, his face pale. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Caleb reached for his father's hand, holding it tightly, as if to anchor him against the tide of horror. The prosecutor asked Victor, "Did Olivia ever express concern for her husband's well-being?" Victor smirked. "Concern? Number?" She said he was the perfect test subject, disposable but useful. Gasps filled the room. I felt bile rise in my throat. My son, my boy who once promised to build me a beautiful house with his own hands, reduced to the word disposable. When Olivia finally took the stand in her own defense, she transformed. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke of loving Dan, of sleepless nights tending to him, of desperation driving her into bad company. "I was scared," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what else to do. I never wanted to hurt him. I only wanted to save him. Her lawyer guided her gently, painting her as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by stronger, greedier forces. Watching her, I almost couldn't believe this was the same woman whose voice I had heard on Caleb's phone, cold and calculating. She wept, but her eyes still flickered with defiance. Then came cross-examination. The prosecutor played the recordings Caleb had found once more. Olivia's own voice filled the courtroom. After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse. This case will secure everything we need. The jury leaned forward. Some shook their heads. Olivia's tears dried up in an instant, her face hardening. That's not me, she snapped. It's fabricated. But then Caleb was called. My heart ached as my grandson walked to the stand, so small in that vast courtroom. He clutched the phone in his hand, the same cracked phone that had saved us all. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. It's her. That's my mom's voice. I heard her say it. I saw her give Dad pills. I knew it was wrong. And the defense tried to rattle him, asking if anyone had told him what to say. Caleb looked straight at the lawyer, his little chin lifted. No one told me. I told the truth because my grandma almost died because of her. The room fell silent. Even the judge's eyes softened. By the time Caleb stepped down, Olivia's fate was sealed. Her lawyer sputtered, tried to recover, but the jury had seen enough. The mask was gone. The truth stood exposed, raw and undeniable. As the day ended and court adjourned, I sat in the hallway, my hands trembling. Sam placed a steadying arm around my shoulders. We're almost there, Mom, he said softly. Justice is coming. I looked at Dan, frail but alive. I looked at Caleb, weary but brave, and I whispered a prayer of thanks. The battle wasn't finished, but we had survived to see the truth spoken aloud. That, in itself, was a miracle. The final day of the trial arrived with a chill wind sweeping through downtown Pittsburgh. Snow flurries drifted past the courthouse steps, as if the heavens themselves wanted to cleanse the air of all that had been revealed inside those walls. I walked slowly, my arm hooked through Sam's, Caleb clutching my other hand, and Dan following with careful steps, supported by a nurse. None of us spoke. Words felt too fragile for what awaited us. Inside, the courtroom was hushed, heavy with anticipation. Reporters sat poised with pens and cameras. Jurors filed in with solemn faces. And Olivia Carter sat at the defense table, her posture stiff, her eyes narrowed. She looked different now, no longer the polished wife in a Navy suit, but a woman stripped of pretense. Her hair was pulled tight, her cheeks hollow, and her hands clenched into fists on the table. The judge entered, his black robe swaying as he took his seat. The room rose, then settled. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I whispered a silent prayer. Let the truth prevail. Let justice be done. The foreman of the jury stood, a sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hands. His voice was steady, but I could feel the weight of every word. In the case of the Commonwealth versus Olivia Carter, on the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit medical fraud, guilty. On the charge of participation in illegal organ trafficking, guilty. Gasps rippled through the room. Caleb squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt, but I welcomed the pain it reminded me that we were still here, still alive. Olivia's face twisted, her calm shattered. This is a lie, she shouted, surging to her feet. Her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she wrenched free, her voice shrill and desperate. You don't understand. I was building something greater. They'll thank me one day. Science needs sacrifices. Her words rang out, wild and broken, but no one moved to comfort her. The guard stepped forward, placing firm hands on her arms, guiding her back into her chair. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Order! This court will have order. I stared at Olivia, my chest tight. For so long, I had prayed she would show even a flicker of remorse, some sign that beneath the lies there had been a woman who once loved my son. But there was nothing. Only madness, defiance, and a hunger for power that had consumed her. The judge cleared his throat. Given the gravity of the crimes and the evidence presented, this court sentences Olivia Carter to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. A murmur swept the courtroom. I closed my eyes, tears slipping free. Life in prison. It would never undo the damage she had caused, never erase the nights of fear or the scars left on my son's body. But it was justice. At last, justice. Dan let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. Sam's arm tightened protectively around me. Caleb, his eyes wide, whispered softly, "Does this mean she can't hurt us anymore, Grandma?" I bent down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "That's right, my boy. She can't hurt us anymore. Arlie do." Olivia was led away in chains, her shouts echoing down the hall as she was dragged from the courtroom. "You'll see, you'll all see, I was right." Her voice faded, but the chill of it lingered. Afterward, we gathered in the quiet of the courthouse lobby. The marble floor gleamed, the high ceiling echoed with footsteps, but around us there was a strange calm. Reporters tried to press close, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled. "Mrs. Harris, how do you feel? Do you think justice was served? What comes next for your family?" But Sam stepped in front of me, shielding me as he always did. "No statements today," he said firmly. "Leave my family alone." We left through a side door, the cold air biting against our cheeks. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe deeply. The snow stung my skin, but it was clean, pure, untouched by lies. That evening, back at home, the house felt different. The shadows seemed less heavy, the silence less suffocating. Edward sat in his chair by the window, his gaze distant as always. But when I told him the verdict, I swear I saw a tear slip down his cheek. Maybe he understood more than I thought. Dan lay on the sofa, Caleb curled beside him. His voice was tired but lighter than before. "It's over, Mom. She can't touch us anymore." I sat in the armchair across from him, knitting idle in my lap. "Yes, son, it's over." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't truly over. Not yet. The wounds Olivia left would take years to heal. Trust once broken does not mend easily. Sam stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, staring into the flames. "We survived," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "That's what matters. We'll rebuild from here." I looked at each of them, Sam, strong and steady. Dan, fragile but fighting. Caleb, brave beyond his years, and I felt a surge of love so fierce it stole my breath. Olivia had tried to destroy us, but we were still standing, bruised, scarred, but together. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my old diary. The lamplight flickered across the pages as I wrote. Today, justice was done. The woman who betrayed us will never walk free again. But the price has been high. My son's health, my grandson's innocence, my own faith in family, all of it wounded. Still, we endure. Still, we rise. And perhaps that is the greater victory. Not that evil was punished, but that we refused to be broken by it. I closed the diary, listening to the steady hum of the dialysis machine in the other room, the quiet creak of the old house settling around us. For the first time in months, I let myself believe that tomorrow might bring not just survival, but healing. The weeks after the trial felt strangely quiet, as if the world had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The snow melted, the streets of Pittsburgh thawed, and little by little, so did we. Dan settled into a routine of treatments. The dialysis machine hummed steadily in the corner of the living room, its rhythm almost becoming part of the household's heartbeat. At first, he hated it. The needles, the fatigue, the way it tethered him to a machine, but over time, he began to see it differently. "It's not a prison," he told me one afternoon, his voice weak but clear. "It's a lifeline, a second chance." His strength was returning, slowly but surely. Caleb began to laugh again. The nightmares didn't vanish overnight, but they came less often. He started bringing his toys back into the living room, lining up his little cars across the coffee table, telling stories about them in the same animated voice I had missed. Once, while pushing a toy truck along the floor, he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, do you think heroes are always big people?" I smiled, brushed his hair back, and answered, "No, sweetheart. Sometimes the bravest heroes are the smallest ones." He grinned then, a genuine grin that lit up the room. Sam never slowed down. He worked long hours, cared for his brother, checked on his father, and still made sure I wasn't left alone. Sometimes, I caught him sitting on the porch at night, staring into the distance, his shoulders heavy with the weight he carried. "Sam," I told him once, placing a hand on his arm, "you don't have to be everyone's savior." He shook his head, gave me a tired smile, and said, "Maybe not, but I'll never let this family fall apart. Not on my watch." And Edward, my silent husband, remained in his chair, his body frail, his voice absent, but I talked to him every day. I told him about Dan's progress, Caleb's laughter, Sam's determination. And though he rarely responded, sometimes his eyes seemed clearer, his gaze more focused. Once, when I placed my hand over his, I felt the faintest squeeze, and tears filled my eyes. Even in silence, he was still with me. Life did not return to what it had been before. Too much had changed. Too much had been lost. But we found a new rhythm, one built not on denial but on truth. The community rallied around us. Parishioners from St. Joseph's brought casseroles and soups. Neighbors stopped by to shovel snow from the driveway or drop off groceries. People I barely knew would pause in the street to say, "God bless you, Mrs. Harris. You and your family are an inspiration." I accepted their kindness, though part of me still felt undeserving. Inspiration? I had been afraid, hesitant, nearly fooled, but perhaps surviving, enduring, was enough. Emily Chen visited often, checking on us, updating me on the broader investigation. "Your case opened the floodgates," she told me one evening, sipping tea at my kitchen table. "More families have come forward." Olivia's conviction gave them the courage to speak. "The authorities are dismantling the network piece by piece." Her words filled me with both relief and sorrow. Relief that others might be spared. Sorrow that so many had already suffered. I thought of those mothers who had stood where I once stood, confused, pressured, desperate to save their children. I whispered a prayer for them, that they might find light in their darkness too. One afternoon, Dan asked to go outside. The air was crisp, the last patches of snow melting into the grass. Sam helped him into a chair on the porch, and Caleb sat at his feet, chattering about school. I stood in the doorway, watching them, my heart swelling. For the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of normalcy, of peace. Dan turned his face toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse but steady, "thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't." Tears stung my eyes. I shook my head. "No, son, it wasn't me. It was Caleb. He saved us all." Dan reached for his boy's shoulder, squeezing it gently. Caleb beamed, his little chest puffed with pride. That moment, father and son, wounded but together, was worth every tear, every sleepless night. As spring came, I found myself writing more often in my diary. Words poured out of me, memories, fears, hopes, prayers. One night, as the house slept, I wrote, "We are not the same family we once were. We are scarred, but scars are proof of survival. Olivia tried to destroy us, but we remain. Sam's strength, Dan's resilience, Caleb's courage, they are the pillars now. And me? I am the witness. I will carry the story not with shame, but with the conviction that truth matters, even when it costs dearly." Sometimes, late at night, I would step onto the porch, look up at the stars, and think of what Father Brennan had told me. Truth and faith go hand in hand. I finally understood. Faith isn't blind. Faith is choosing to walk forward, even when you know how dark the road can be. Caleb joined me once on the porch. He climbed onto my lap, pointed at the sky, and asked, "Grandma, do you think God was watching when I ran into the hospital?" I kissed the top of his head. "Yes, my boy. I think he gave you the strength to do what no one else could." He thought about that for a moment, then whispered, "Then maybe I wasn't so scared after all." I held him close, my heart full. Children have a way of speaking truths we grown-ups are too afraid to voice. As the months passed, the pain dulled, replaced by something sturdier. Not joy, not yet, but gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for the second chances, for the courage found in unlikely places. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, casting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I stood on the porch and whispered to myself, "We're still here. We're still standing. And for the first time, I believed it. The first summer after the trial felt like a rebirth. The heavy Pittsburgh snow had long melted, replaced by warm breezes that carried the smell of freshly cut grass and blooming lilacs from the neighbors' yards. For months, our lives had revolved around hospitals, lawyers, and whispered fears. But that June, we began to rediscover what it meant simply to live. Dan grew stronger with each passing week. Though the dialysis machine still hummed faithfully in the corner, his cheeks carried more color, and his laugh, though softer than before, returned to our evenings. One Saturday morning, he surprised us all by stepping into the backyard on his own, leaning on a cane. "I don't want to watch life through the window anymore," he said with a smile. The sunlight touched his face, and for a moment, I saw the boy he once was, running barefoot across the same yard with Sam chasing behind him. Caleb was never far from his father's side. He had carried more weight than any child should, but now he ran freely again, darting across the grass with his toy cars, shouting with joy when Dan clapped for him. His laughter was like music high, unrestrained, a sound I feared I might never hear again. Sam remained the anchor of our family. He worked tirelessly, yet he found time to restore the garden Edward once tended. I watched from the porch as Sam knelt in the soil, his strong hands planting rows of tomatoes and peppers. "Dad would want this," he said when I asked why. "Something steady, something that grows." I knew he wasn't just talking about vegetables. He was planting hope for all of us. Even Edward seemed more present. Though he still sat silently in his chair, his eyes followed the movement in the yard, and when Caleb rushed to him with a bouquet of wildflowers one afternoon, a faint smile curved his lips. I hadn't seen that smile in years, and it brought tears to my eyes. For myself, I found healing in small rituals. I rose early each morning to make coffee, opening the kitchen window to let in the summer air. I tended the roses along the fence, their petals soft beneath my calloused fingers. And every evening, I wrote in my diary pages filled not with fear, but with gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for truth, for the resilience of a family that refused to be broken. One evening in July, we gathered on the porch as the fireflies began to glow in the dusk. Dan sat with Caleb on his lap, Sam leaned against the railing, and Edward dozed peacefully in his chair. I looked at them all, the people I loved most in the world, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Dan broke the silence, his voice soft. "Mom, I don't know what the future holds, but I know I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. And for Caleb. You saved me." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No, son. We saved each other. That's what families do." Caleb piped up then, his little voice full of conviction. "We're like superheroes, right, Grandma? We beat the bad guys." We all laughed, the sound carrying into the warm night. And for once, it didn't feel forced. It felt real. That summer taught me that healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in moments: the smell of fresh tomatoes from the garden, the sound of Caleb's laughter, the warmth of Dan's hand in mine. It comes in believing that even after the darkest winter, summer will return. And as I sat on that porch, the fireflies blinking in the yard, I whispered a prayer of thanks. We had walked through the fire, and though we bore scars, we had emerged together, stronger, wiser, and still standing. Autumn arrived gently, brushing Pittsburgh with crisp air and leaves that painted the streets in gold and crimson. The long summer of healing gave way to routines more familiar, but nothing felt quite the same. We had been reshaped by what we endured, and as the days shortened, I found myself looking at life with new eyes. Dan was growing stronger every week. Though dialysis remained a part of his life, he refused to let it define him. "I can't go back to construction," he admitted one evening as we sat on the porch, the wind rattling the branches overhead. "But maybe I can teach. Maybe I can help young folks who want to learn the trade." His eyes shone not with regret, but with determination. It was the first time I'd seen him talk about the future without fear. Caleb returned to school that September, his small backpack bouncing as he ran toward the doors. I stood on the sidewalk, my heart tight, watching him disappear into the crowd of children. For so long I had feared his innocence was lost forever, but each day he came home with new stories about a drawing contest, about a new friend, about a science project that made him laugh. He still had shadows in his eyes sometimes, but they were lifting, replaced by the brightness of a boy who had earned his childhood back. Sam remained our steady rock. He split his time between work, caring for his brother, and tending the garden. But I began to notice something else in him, a longing. One Sunday afternoon, as he pulled weeds from the rows of peppers, I asked gently, "Son, when will you think of yourself?" He paused, wiped sweat from his brow, and gave me a sheepish smile. "Maybe soon, Mom. There's someone I've been talking to. She works at the hardware store. Nothing serious yet, but maybe someday." For the first time in years, hope flickered in his eyes, and I prayed it would grow. As for Edward, he remained in his chair, mostly silent, but his presence was still a comfort. On cooler evenings, we wheeled him out to the porch, wrapped in blankets, so he could watch the leaves fall. Sometimes I caught him following Caleb with his eyes, and once, when Dan cracked a small joke, I swear I heard Edward's breath hitch in what might have been a laugh. It wasn't much, but it was something. For myself, I felt the weight of years more sharply that autumn. My hands ached from the cold, my steps slowed, and yet I carried a strength I hadn't known before. The trial, the lies, the near loss of everything had carved deep lines in me, but it had also carved clarity. I knew now what mattered most. Not possessions, not appearances, but truth and the bonds that hold a family together. One afternoon in October, as the leaves swirled across the yard, Caleb ran to me with a school assignment. "Grandma, we had to write about our hero," he announced proudly, thrusting the paper into my hands. His childish handwriting filled the page. "My hero is my grandma, because she saved my dad and me. She never gave up, even when it was hard. She is stronger than anyone I know." My throat tightened as I read his words. I had never thought of myself as a hero, only as a mother, a grandmother, a woman trying to survive. But in Caleb's eyes, survival was enough. In his eyes, I was everything. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sun set behind the rooftops. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke. I thought about the road behind us, the fear, the betrayal, the nights I thought we wouldn't make it. And I thought about the road ahead, uncertain, yes, but lit now with small flames of hope. "Lord," I whispered into the quiet, "thank you for carrying us through. Thank you for giving me the strength I didn't know I had. And thank you for these days of peace, however many more there may be." Autumn, I realized, was more than a season of endings. It was a season of harvest, of gathering what we had sown, of holding close the blessings we still had. And as the leaves drifted to the ground, I felt my own burdens lift, leaving behind a heart ready to embrace whatever came next. Winter came early that year, sweeping across Pittsburgh with biting winds and heavy snow. The first flakes fell in November, blanketing the neighborhood in white silence. For many families, winter meant holidays, laughter, and gatherings. For us, it carried something more complicated, a mix of gratitude for survival and the lingering shadows of what we had endured the year before. Dan moved more carefully in the cold, bundled in heavy coats and scarves whenever we took him to the clinic. The dialysis continued to weigh on him, but he met it with a resilience that surprised even himself. "Last year, I didn't think I'd see another Christmas," he said one evening as we sat near the fireplace. "This year, I intend to enjoy every minute of it." His smile was tired but genuine, and it warmed me more than the fire ever could. Caleb loved the snow. He spent hours outside, building forts and rolling snowballs bigger than himself. His laughter carried through the frosty air, a sound that reminded me how far he had come. Sometimes he would stop mid-play and look at me, his cheeks red, his breath puffing in the cold. "Grandma, do you remember last winter, when everything was scary?" I always bent down and pulled him close. "Yes, sweetheart, but look at us now. We made it through." And he would nod, satisfied, before running back into the snow as if leaving those memories behind with each step. Sam, ever steady, took on the burden of preparing for the holidays. He strung lights along the porch, brought home a Christmas tree, and filled the house with the scent of pine. I caught him once late at night, sitting by the lit tree with a mug of coffee in his hand. His gaze was far away, thoughtful. When I asked what he was thinking, he answered quietly, "I just want this house to feel like home again, like it used to. I placed my hand on his and whispered, "It already does, son, because we're still here." Edward remained in his chair, but the glow of the Christmas lights seemed to soften his expression. Caleb often placed small ornaments in his lap, giggling as he explained each one. "This one's a reindeer, Grandpa, and this is Santa. He brings presents." Edward's lips twitched once, and though no sound came, I knew he was listening. As Christmas drew near, I found myself reflecting more than celebrating. The trial, Olivia's betrayal, the nights in the hospital, they felt both distant and near, like a shadow that lurked just beyond the glow of the holiday lights. Yet I also felt a deep gratitude. We were together, scarred, yes, but alive, and still able to share the warmth of family. On Christmas Eve, we gathered around the table. It wasn't the feast it once had been, just roasted chicken, potatoes, and a pie Sam bought from the bakery. But it was enough. We held hands before eating, and Dan whispered the prayer. "Lord, thank you for keeping us. Thank you for giving us another chance. And thank you for the strength of my family." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed Caleb's small hand in mine. When the prayer ended, Caleb added in his clear little voice, "And thank you for my grandma. She's the strongest person I know." The room fell silent, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone by the window. Outside, snow fell softly, covering the world in silence. I opened my old diary and wrote, "1 year ago, I feared I would not live to see another Christmas. 1 year ago, I doubted truth would ever come to light, and yet here we are. Winter has returned, but it no longer feels like a season of despair. It feels like proof that even after the coldest storms, warmth can be found again." I closed the diary and looked at the snow-covered yard, the lights twinkling on the tree, the quiet breathing of my family in their sleep. For the first time in a long while, winter did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a reminder of endurance, of survival, of the promise that spring would come again. Spring crept into Pittsburgh quietly, almost shyly at first. The snow melted into rushing streams along the curbs, the gray skies gave way to pale blue, and crocuses pushed their way up through the thawing earth. For months we had lived in the shadow of winter, wrapped in blankets of survival, but with spring came something new: renewal. Dan was the first to notice it. One morning, as the sunlight spilled across the living room floor, he said, "Mom, I want to walk without the cane today." His voice was steady, but I could hear the determination beneath it. With Sam by his side and Caleb cheering, he stood tall, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. His legs wobbled, his breath caught, but he walked 3 steps, then 5, then 10. When he finally sat back down, sweat glistening on his forehead, Caleb clapped his little hands and shouted, "You're stronger than Superman, Dad." Dan laughed, the sound rusty but full of life. Caleb himself seemed to bloom with the season. He spent hours outside, chasing butterflies, kicking a ball, or digging in the garden with Sam. One afternoon he ran to me with a dandelion in his hand. "Make a wish, Grandma," he said, placing the flower in my palm. I closed my eyes, blew gently, and watched the seeds scatter into the breeze. My wish was simple, that he would never again have to carry the weight of secrets too heavy for a child. Sam worked tirelessly in the yard, turning the soil, planting rows of beans and tomatoes. He told me he had been seeing more of the young woman from the hardware store, and though he tried to downplay it, I saw the light in his eyes. "You deserve happiness too, son," I told him one evening, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. He nodded, a shy smile tugging at his lips. Edward remained mostly silent, but the warmer air seemed to stir something in him. We wheeled him out onto the porch more often, and he would sit for hours watching the birds dart between the budding trees. Caleb often perched on the arm of his chair, telling him stories about school or showing him the worms he found in the garden. Edward's eyes followed every word, and once, just once, I saw his lips curve into a faint smile. For myself, I found peace in simple things. Hanging laundry on the line, kneeling in the soil to pull weeds, or sitting on the porch with a cup of tea while the world turned green again. Each moment felt like a gift, one I had once thought I'd never live to see. The community, too, began to draw us back in. At church, people greeted us warmly, their words kind rather than pitying. One Sunday after Mass, Father Brennan pulled me aside. "Maggie," he said gently, "your family has shown this parish what it means to endure. Don't hide your story. Share it. Let others see that truth and courage can triumph." At first I hesitated. Speaking aloud about what we had endured felt like reopening a wound. But slowly, I began to share first with a small women's group at church, then with neighbors who asked. Each time, I felt the burden lighten, replaced by something unexpected: strength. My pain, spoken aloud, became a lantern for others. One evening, as we sat on the porch with the scent of lilacs in the air, Caleb asked me, "Grandma, do you think we'll ever forget everything that happened?" I pulled him close, kissed his forehead, and said softly, "No, sweetheart, we won't forget. But forgetting isn't what makes us strong. Remembering and still choosing to live, that's where strength comes from." As spring deepened, I realized that our scars were not signs of weakness, but of survival. The lies, the trial, the long winter, they had not destroyed us. They had shaped us, tempered us like steel. And as the garden bloomed, the birds sang, and my family laughed in the soft evening light, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Life had returned, not the same as before, but perhaps stronger, deeper, and truer than it had ever been. By the time summer came again, our house no longer felt like a place of grief. It felt like a home again. The walls still carried echoes of what had happened, but laughter had returned to them, weaving through the rooms like sunlight through the windows. Dan had been working with a local trade school, helping young apprentices learn basic construction skills. The first day he walked into that classroom, he came home exhausted, his voice hoarse, but his eyes shone with purpose. "I may not swing a hammer like I used to," he told me, "but I can teach them how. And maybe, in a way, I'm still building, just not with wood and nails, but with knowledge." Caleb was his shadow, following him to the trade school on weekends, fascinated by the tools and the stories of building houses. One afternoon, Dan handed him a small wooden birdhouse they had built together. Caleb's smile stretched wide as he held it up. "Grandma, this is our house for the birds." Dad says I hammered one nail almost straight. His pride was contagious, and I laughed through my tears. Sam, after months of steady work and quiet evenings in the garden, finally introduced us to the young woman he had been seeing. Her name was Anna, and she carried herself with a warmth that filled the room instantly. She brought a pie when she first visited, and Caleb declared after the first bite, "You should marry her, Uncle Sam, so she can make pies all the time." We all laughed, even Edward, whose shoulders shook in what I swore was a silent chuckle. Edward's health remained fragile, but there were moments, small miracles that reminded me he was still with us. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, Caleb leaned against his grandfather's knee, telling him about school. Suddenly, Edward's voice, faint but clear, broke the silence. "You're a brave boy, Caleb." The words startled us all. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Caleb looked up, wide-eyed, and whispered, "Grandpa talked to me." For days after, that moment carried us, proof that even the quietest souls still had light to give. For myself, I began to feel a strength I had not known before. Not the strength of muscles or youth, but the strength of having endured. I realized that my story, the one I had tried so hard to keep hidden, was no longer a burden. It was a testament. Women from the church, neighbors, even strangers began to ask me to speak at small gatherings. They wanted to hear how a grandmother and a little boy had stood against lies and cruelty. At first, I resisted, thinking my voice too small, my story too heavy. But each time I spoke, I saw heads nodding, eyes shining, hands reaching for mine. My pain was no longer just mine, it had become a light for others walking in darkness. One Sunday, Father Brennan asked if I would stand before the parish and share my testimony. My knees trembled as I walked to the front, my heart pounding. But when I saw Caleb's proud face in the front pew, I knew I could not stay silent. I spoke not of hatred or revenge, but of truth, of family, of the power of refusing to be broken. When I finished, the church was silent for a long moment before rising in applause. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed, whispering to myself, "Lord, this is your doing, not mine." That summer also brought moments of pure joy. We hosted a small barbecue in the backyard, inviting neighbors and friends who had stood by us through the trial. Children ran through sprinklers, Sam grilled burgers, and Anna laughed beside him, her hand brushing his as she passed plates. Dan sat with his students under the shade tree, sharing stories of construction sites and the lessons of hard work. Caleb darted between groups, his energy boundless. And I, standing on the porch with iced tea in hand, felt a wave of gratitude so deep it nearly buckled my knees. But amidst the joy, there were still moments when shadows returned. Late at night, I sometimes woke in a cold sweat, hearing echoes of Olivia's voice in my dreams. She won't dare refuse. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the old fear creeping back. Yet each time, I reminded myself, she was gone, justice had been done. And even in those sleepless hours, I could hear Caleb's steady breathing in the next room, and Dan's quiet snore down the hall. Those sounds anchored me, pulling me back from the abyss. As August waned and summer began to fade, I realized how far we had come. We were no longer just surviving. We were living, loving, building again. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, I sat on the porch with my family around me, Caleb perched on my lap, holding the little birdhouse he and Dan had built. Sam and Anna laughed quietly together near the garden. Dan leaned back in his chair, tired but content. Edward dozed beside us, his hand warm in mine. I looked at them, at the faces that had carried me through the storm, and I felt my chest swell with pride. We had been broken, yes, but we had pieced ourselves back together, stronger at the seams. "Grandma," Caleb whispered, his head against my shoulder, "do you think we're safe now?" I kissed the top of his head and answered softly, "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe. And no matter what comes, we'll face it together." The cicadas hummed in the warm air. The garden swayed gently in the breeze. And for the first time in a long time, I believed every word I had spoken. As autumn returned once more, I found myself sitting on the porch in the cool evening air, a shawl draped around my shoulders. The leaves had begun to fall, swirling across the yard in bursts of red and gold. The same yard where my sons once played, where Caleb now ran with his toy cars, where Edward sat in quiet silence. Life had turned a full circle, and though it was marked with scars, it was also filled with grace. It had been more than a year since the trial, more than a year since the day Caleb burst into that operating room and changed everything. Some days, the memory still haunted me, the sterile smell of the hospital, the blinding light of the surgical lamp, Olivia's cold eyes. But when those shadows rose, I reminded myself of what followed. The truth spoken aloud, the verdict, the freedom to live again. Dan was no longer the man he had been before illness and betrayal, but he had become something greater, a teacher, a father who had learned the value of each moment. Watching him guide young apprentices filled me with pride. He had lost much, but he had found purpose. Sam, my steady son, had finally allowed joy to return to his own life. He and Anna were inseparable now, and when I saw the way he looked at her, I knew love had found its way back into our family. Caleb adored her, and sometimes I caught him whispering, "Uncle Sam's gonna marry her, I just know it." His innocent certainty made us laugh, but deep down, I hoped he was right. Edward remained my quiet companion, his body frail, but his presence steadfast. I had once feared he was lost to me entirely, but even in his silence, he reminded me that love can endure in ways words cannot. And Caleb, my brave little grandson, he was the light that had guided us through it all. He no longer carried the same heaviness in his eyes. He laughed freely, dreamed boldly, and lived with a courage beyond his years. I often told him, "You saved us, Caleb. Don't ever forget that." And he would smile, shake his head, and say, "No, Grandma, we saved each other." As I looked back on everything, I realized the greatest lesson was not about betrayal or even justice. It was about endurance, about the quiet, stubborn strength of a family that refused to be broken. Evil had come close to destroying us, but it failed, because truth, though it may falter in the shadows, always rises in the end. That night, I opened my diary and wrote my final entry. Blood may bind us, but it is truth and love that make us a family. We walk through darkness, but we found light in one another. My children, my grandson, my husband, we are proof that even the deepest wounds can heal. Life is fragile, but it is also resilient. And as long as we hold on to each other, we will never be lost. I closed the book, set it aside, and listened to the sounds of my home. Caleb's laughter drifting down the hall, Dan humming softly as he prepared for bed, Sam's low voice talking with Anna on the porch, Edward's gentle breathing beside me. The storm had passed. The scars remained, but so did we. And in that quiet moment, with the autumn leaves swirling and the night sky opening wide above us, I knew we had not just survived, we had triumphed. Because in the end, love had the final word. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter a new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving. And I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.